Hi, this is Craig Stocks here at Utah Desert Remote Observatories. You can find us online at utahdesertremote.com. And today I'm going to talk about how to use Photoshop to manage color and to create a nice neutral background in your astro images using Photoshop. So I've got a couple images set up to use as examples. The first one I'm going to start with is an image of the Eastern Veil Nebula. And I've got that loaded here in Photoshop. And if you can see in the layers stack, I've got the three files that I created in PixInsight. PixInsight is great for processing astronomical data. It's not very good for editing photographs. And once you've stretched the image and you're starting to work with color and optimizing it, you're really working with a photograph. You're not working with astronomical data anymore. At least that's my perspective. So we're going to use Photoshop because Photoshop and tools like it are really optimized for working on photos. And you can see I've got three layers in the layers palette. The top one is the stars. Below that we have the simple RGB. This was taken with a one-shot color camera. So this is the RGB. And then this was captured with an L-enhance, which gives us a little bit more detail and a little bit strange color. The colors are pretty neutral already because I started in PixInsight using the spectrophotometric color calibration, and that gives us a pretty neutral background to start with. But what I want to do is show you the technique I use to create a nice neutral background. Sometimes the differences are even more dramatic than they are here. And after we do this one-shot color, we'll move into some monochrome HOO and SHO images. So first, I like to put everything in groups. So I'm going to start with the stars layer, and a keyboard shortcut that you'll find really convenient is Control-G to put the current layer into a layer group, and that would be Command-G on a Mac. And I'll just label this stars. And for now, we'll put this in screen blending mode and then just collapse this layer group and turn it off so it's out of the way. Next we have our luminosity or luminance, which is just plain RGB. And lastly, we have the L-enhance data. I'll just call that LE. And let's start by neutralizing the color in the L-enhance data. And to do that, what I want to do is neutralize a black point. So there's a couple aspects to this. First, I want to find the darkest part of the image and set that as my black point. And I want that black point to be a neutral color. In other words, no color cast of red, green, or blue, just pure dark gray, not black. So first we have to find the darkest part of the image, and then we need to neutralize that darkest part of the image. So we're going to do that in a couple steps. First, to find the darkest part of the image, I'm going to do a couple things. First, I'm going to create a layer, and this will be just a solid color fill layer. And I'm going to get to that using the symbol at the bottom of the layers palette that looks kind of like a yin-yang symbol. And the first option in that list is solid color. And I want to create a solid black color fill layer, which is when the color picker comes up, you can see that it's solid black. And if you look at the RGB values, for instance, they're 0, 0, 0. So if I click OK, now we've added that. Now it actually got added inside this RGB group, and I want it outside of any of the groups. So I'm just going to click and drag this layer up to between the stars and the RGB. So now it's on a kind of by itself, not in any group. And I want to put this in a special blending mode. The default blending mode is normal. And I want to put this into divide blending mode. And you'll notice immediately the image turns white. Now I can come down to my L-enhance data, and click on that L-enhanced layer, and I want to add a levels adjustment layer, and I can get to that from the adjustments palette by just clicking on the icon to add a levels adjustment layer. And what I can do now is, if I use these sliders on the histogram, the black slider, the far left one, if I drag it to the right, it makes the image darker. Let's turn this off so you can see what's happening. It's making the image darker by darkening the blacks. The right-hand slider would brighten the whites, and the midpoint slider works in the midpoint, darkening and brightening. I can reset that now. It's a little bit confusing sometimes, these lower sliders, and you can see that there's a gradient here. What this is doing is setting the blackest black or the whitest white in the image. So if I move this lower black slider to the right, it's actually making the lightest black somewhat lighter, so it's lightening the blacks when I move it to the right, or the white slider, it's darkening the whites. Normally you won't use these sliders, you'll use the upper ones. But what I want to do now is find the point where we can see the darkest part of the image. So to do that, I'm going to turn this black layer back on, and then I'm going to move the black slider in to the right, and you can see that it starts to turn colors, and then eventually it turns black. And what I'm looking for is kind of the first area to turn black, but I'm also looking for the first significant area to turn black. Sometimes you'll have areas around the perimeter where there was vignetting or something, so I'm really looking for something in the image that's turning black. And it could be this spot right here as the first area that's really turning black. So what I want to do is drop a sample point right there. So I'll zoom in with the mouse wheel, and I'm going to come over to the toolbar on the left, and from the color sampler eyedropper, I'm going to choose a color sampler, and I can come in here and click and actually drop a color sample point right there. And now if we look in the tool options, we can see that this is set to sample an 11 by 11 pixel area. You can choose different sample sizes. You generally don't want a point sample or a 3 by 3. You want something a little bit larger, so it's averaging a number of pixels. So 11 by 11 should work well for this. And what I want to do now is neutralize that color sample, and I want to make it specifically RGB values of 19, 19, 19. So to do that, first I'm going to turn off this black layer. Now I'm going to come back to our levels adjustment, and I'm just going to reset this with the reset button. And the numbers that I want to look at are not the numbers here with the histogram. I want to look at the numbers over here on the info palette, and I can see right now the red value at that point is 8, so it's actually a little darker than the target, and then actually all three of them are a little darker than the target that I want. So I'm going to have to brighten these. So this is a case where I'm going to be using this bottom slider to actually brighten that dark area. So I want to first target the red. I want to raise this 8 value to 19. So in the levels adjustment, I can target just the red channel. And since I want to brighten the black, I'm going to use this lower slider and slide it to the right until that 8 turns into a 19. And so you can now see that before the adjustment the value is 8, after the adjustment the value is 19, which is exactly what we want. That's the red channel. And I'll do the same thing for the green. Take it up to 19. And then the same for the blue. Take it up to 19. And now we have a neutralized black point in this image. Typically I would do the same thing then with the RGB layer, and if we look at it, we can see that it's a little bit of a mixed bag at that same point, 25, 23, and 15. So again, I'll add a levels adjustment layer, and I'm going to make these 19, 19, 19, starting first with the red, and this time we need to darken the 24 down to 19. The green will darken to 19, and the blue will brighten slightly to get to 19. So now I have neutralized the black point in each one of these layers. That's the RGB color. This is the L-enhance. One kind of fun trick you can use when you have dual narrowband and straight RGB. The detail and this color saturation are really nice in the L-enhance data. The RGB looks like more of a true color. Right now, the RGB layer group is in pass-through blending mode, which is the default for layer groups. If I change its blending mode to hue, and that's down at the bottom, now what I'm using is the actual natural colors from the RGB layer group, and I'm using the saturation value and the brightness from the L-enhance data. And if I turn that RGB on and off, you can see it's just giving us a much more pleasant, more natural looking color than the L-enhance by itself. And so at this point we can turn the stars back on, and at that point we could call it a finished image. Now I would typically do a couple things with this. First, I would probably darken or reduce the size of the stars a little bit. A real easy way to do that is to come into our stars layer group, add a levels adjustment layer, and then just darken the stars, because stars are a fuzzy spot, and when you darken that fuzzy spot, you make them appear smaller in the image. And you need to be a little bit careful, because if you go too far you can get some really weird looking stars, so a little bit can go a long way. And then typically I would add some global adjustments. So right above this RGB layer group, I would typically add a global levels, color balance, hue saturation, and then I can use these to do global adjustments to the brightness and contrast, or if I want to make a change to the color balance, I can do that here. If I want to change the color saturation, I can do that with the hue saturation adjustment layer. So, at this point you really start into the more creative aspects of editing to create a final image. So that's a one-shot color, neutralizing the red, green, and blue channels of the color data. Let's look at a HOO, or monochrome. And to do that, we're going to look at this data of Pickering's triangle. And again, we have the stars on top. This time we have monochrome data. We have hydrogen and oxygen. And we want to combine these into a color image and start by neutralizing it. So we need to create some layer groups. I'll create a layer group for the stars, name it stars, change it to screen blending mode, and then we'll just turn that off to get it out of the way. The hydrogen group, name this hydrogen. Now I want to do two things in here. I want to add a levels adjustment layer, and that's where we're going to set our black level. And then we're going to add a hue saturation adjustment layer. And since this is going to be an HOO image, and hydrogen is going to be mapped as red, what we want to do is choose colorize for the option on the hue saturation layer. Change the lightness to -50. Change the saturation to 100%, and then we'll leave the color as red. Now we'll do similarly with the oxygen layer. Put it into a group, label it oxygen, and we want to add a levels adjustment layer that we'll use to set the black level, and then a hue saturation. Again, we'll choose colorize, brightness of -50, 100% saturation, and this time we want it to be cyan, so we move the hue slider to 180, which is a pure cyan color. And now we have the oxygen mapped as cyan, which is blue and green, HOO. hydrogen is blue, or hydrogen is red, oxygen is blue, and oxygen is green. And if I turn the hydrogen back on and put this in screen blending mode, you can see we now have our color HOO image, but we need to adjust the black level. So we'll add a solid black solid fill layer, put it in divide blending mode, and let's start with the oxygen. And this will be easier if we turn off the hue saturation momentarily. We'll go to our levels and let's look for the darkest. And you can see there's no color here. This is just white and black, but it looks like our black point is going to be in here. So I'll drop a color sample right there. Turn off our black layer. Reset, and now we just want to change this 67 to 19. If it's difficult to get it in exactly the right place, you can click into the box that has the value for the position of the slider and use the cursor keys to go up and down to fine-tune that position to get right to 19. So we'll turn the color back on, turn off that layer, go to our hydrogen, turn off the hue saturation, turn on our black layer, and move the black slider in to find the darkest point. And it looks like the darkest point here is going to be up here. So I can just grab this color sampler and move it up here. I don't have to create a new one. And we'll do the same thing. We'll reset the levels and adjust this until the numbers over here in the info palette are 19. Now when I turn the hydrogen and oxygen back on, now we have a nicely balanced HOO image. And we would do the same thing. I would turn the stars on, probably reduce the size of the stars, and probably do some global adjustments to create a final image. But this gives me a good starting point. Let's go to a full SHO image. And to do that, I'm going to use one that's a little bit tricky to find a good color balance, and that's the Fish Head Nebula. When I've got the stars on top, and then I've got hydrogen, then oxygen, and then sulfur. And so we need to, just like we did with the previous example, we need to create layer groups, put each one of these in screen blending mode, and then choose the correct color for a hue saturation layer. So we'll start at the top, Control G, this is the stars, and this is going to be in screen blending mode. And we'll just turn that off for now. Hydrogen is next. And I'm going to add a levels adjustment layer and then a hue saturation. And hydrogen, we're going to make green. So we'll colorize, -50, 100% saturation, and green is going to be 120. And that gives us a pure green. We'll just turn that off for now. Go down to the oxygen, add a levels adjustment layer, add a hue saturation adjustment layer, put it in colorize blending mode, lightness of -50, 100% saturation. This is going to be blue, which is 180. Should give us a pure blue. I'm sorry, was it 240 is pure blue. Turn that off for now, and the last one is going to be sulfur. Again, levels, hue saturation, colorize blending mode, -50, 100% saturation, and we're going to just leave this one red. So at this point, I could put all three of these in screen blending mode. I want just the layer group, not everything in it, to be in screen blending mode. So there's a first pass at a color image in SHO, but now we need to neutralize it, and to do that we're going to do just the same thing we did before. We're going to add a black layer. So this will be a solid color layer, pure black, divide blending mode. And I'll turn off hydrogen and oxygen. We'll start with the sulfur. And again, we'll just turn off that hue saturation and find the blackest point. And it looks like it's up here. In fact, I've already got a color sampler at about that point. So we can adjust our black point now so that that's 19. And there's nothing magical about 19. I've just found for my images that works really well, and it keeps the dark areas from getting too dark, but they're still dark enough that they have some real weight to them. So sulfur's done. We'll turn that off. We'll do the same thing with the oxygen. Turn off the hue saturation, turn on the black layer, and the black point looks like it's in about the same place. I think I'll move it a little bit. The black level won't necessarily be in exactly the same place, but usually it's pretty close. And then we'll adjust this black level to 19. And last we'll do our hydrogen. Let's see if it's going to be in about the same place. Yeah, that's a good spot for that. It could move in just a little bit. And we'll set it at 19 also. Okay, so now we have set black points of 19 for hydrogen, oxygen, and sulfur. And when we turn everything on, now we have a pretty good start at an overall color balance. Now, in this one, I feel like it could use quite a bit more red. So I'm going to come down. Sulfur is where the red is coming from. This first levels adjustment layer is the black point. So I tend to just leave it alone, and then I'll add another adjustment layer above it, and that's where I will increase the brightness of the reds. And when I do that, when you move the midpoint, sometimes that also moves that black point, so you may have to adjust it as well. But this gives you a good start at an overall color balance for the image. If we want to bring out more oxygen, again, we can do the same thing. We can increase the blue, and that will again cause us to have to decrease the black point a little bit. And lastly, we may want to go to the hydrogen, and we may even want to reduce it a little bit to have a little bit less green in the image. You know, just looking at it by eye, maybe something like that. So the basic technique here is using this solid color fill layer in divide blending mode. And what divide blending mode does is let you then use a levels adjustment layer to find the darkest point or the blackest point of that layer. And then after you turn off that solid color layer, you can adjust the density at that color sampler point to whatever you've chosen. I like 19, 19, 19 as the dark point for red, green, and blue. And that gives me a great starting point towards finding a good color balance and ensuring that I have a nice neutral background. Hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments down below and I'll try to answer them. And as always, I hope you have a great day today and an even better night tonight under a clear, dark sky. Thanks.